Trevor's unavailable right now, and rather than sit around waiting for him to return, I'm heading out on my own for a series of shorter conversations with authors, creators, and other interesting people. Think of it as a typical no-win scenario episode, just with fewer arguments, less supervision, and no Trevor to stop me. Welcome to No Win Scenario presents Don's Away Mission. And don't worry, Trevor will be back soon.
I haven't listened to anything you've said in the last 20 seconds.
Damn it, Trevor. We had a shtick.
Lying.
Two friends who hate each other.
Rude.
Talking science fiction.
It has become this cultural phenomenon.
Along with some special guests.
I appreciate what Star Trek did to me.
I would love to have this book get banned.
That wasn't acting. That was real.
Do you know what our YouTube channel is?
Absolutely not. No win scenario.
With Trevor and Don.
Okay, we're not doing that.
Boom.
Everybody knows the story of Superman. Rocketed from a dying planet, raised in a Kansas cornfield, faster than a speeding bullet. My guest today argues that the real origin story is the one that nobody put on a movie poster, a shy kid from Cleveland named Jerry Siegel, who dreamed up the world's first superhero and signed away the rights for $130, and then spent the rest of his life fighting the corporations that got rich off his creation. William Bernhardt is the best-selling author of more than 60 books and a former attorney, which turns out to matter a great deal here. His new book is The Superman Wars, and it's a true no-win scenario. Sorry for the pun, if there ever was one. William, thanks for joining me.
I knew you'd work that in somehow, and that was actually pretty clever. I suppose.
Well, thank you. I'm awful. If Trevor was here, he would just bash me for that. But let me get the
I
one
want
more.
to see this. You need to have me back next year when Trevor's around. Okay?
Well, we're going to fly you out to our studio because we actually usually do this in the studio. So once Trevor gets out of bed, he'll personally fly you out. Although he hates planes, so but that's Trevor. Let's not make this about him. Let's make it about you. Okay, so I gotta start with the no-win scenario. So this is no-win scenario. Jerry Siegel, did he have a no-win scenario, sign the release of rights and get published, or hold the rights and stay a nobody? Is that a real choice? It seems like something a lot of people kind of face.
If you're asking my opinion, I think Superman was an example of exactly the right character at exactly the right time. And yes, it had to be published, but I don't think it mattered who published it. I think it would have been a hit. Anybody who could get it on the newsstands. And as you probably know, Jerry came up with the idea for Superman, got his best friend Joe Schuster to draw it. So they co-created this character. Jerry spent years marketing it, trying to get a newspaper strip, because that's where the big action was at that time, in the middle of the Depression, looming war in Europe, hard times at home. And it was only after years of trying to get a strip deal, when he couldn't, that he said, okay, finally, he'd given and let it be published in a comic book. Major Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson was the guy who basically invented the modern comic book format and started the first company, which he called Nicholson Publishing, that will eventually morph into DC, although that doesn't become the official name until 1976. But Jerry and Joe had been working with the Major for a couple of years on other strips. Clip Carson and, no, not Clip Carson, that's Bob Kane, I'm sorry. See, I've had my head in a different book this morning, so I'm saying the wrong thing. Slam Bradley is probably his biggest pre-Superman hit. And he'd worked with the Major for a couple of years. The Major was also a writer as well as a former military officer, and he trusted him. The Major never tried to get anything other than North American first serial rights, and that's how they operated for years. But you know what happened. Just at the 11th hour, Harry Donenfeld, with his assistant Jack Leibowitz, managed to take the Major's company from him. It's all in the book, but it might be legal. It was certainly less than scrupulous, but these are guys who had done this before. They were sharks, basically. And they created debt, and they bought debt, and they got the company by putting the Major in involuntary bankruptcy. So while Jerry is trying to, relent and let Superman be published, the company changes hands, and he clearly barely knows what's going on and doesn't deal with it well. And Jack sends him a release saying, "Oh, we'll publish this, but here's the catch." I heard you say in the intro that they sold it for $130, which is often said. I would argue that's not exactly true, because the 130 is for the story. It's a 13-page story and they got $10 a page. That was just for the first story. It is true that later in the letter agreement it says, and by the way, all the rights to all the characters and everything associated with this are now ours, but there was no additional money given for that. So I would argue they gave Superman away for nothing, or perhaps just because they wanted to see it in print. At any rate, I can make excuses, but Jerry did sign that piece of paper. He didn't have an agent. He didn't have a lawyer. He lost his father when he was 17 years old. Joe's father was the elevator operator at a local hospital. They didn't have anybody they could talk to. And boy, did that make a difference. So Jerry signs it, something he regrets the rest of his life. And yeah, it does get into print. And he even gets that newspaper strip that he wanted. The problem is he doesn't own it anymore. He's working for somebody else. And that just creates all kinds of problems. At this point, I don't even remember what your question actually was. So maybe you can fill me in and tell me where I'm going with this.
It always goes back to no-win scenarios. No.
Yes. Yeah. I don't think it was a no-win scenario. I mean, he could have just sat there. He could have, made $1 million somewhere and published it himself. But, the sensible thing was, of course, to get an established publisher. And it's just galling. People will say, well, Jerry and Joe made some money in the early days, and that's true. They certainly did, although not a fraction of what Harry Donenfeld's make. Harry, who laughed at it when he saw this and said, "This guy's holding a car over his head," sure. But he mostly focused on distribution and let Jack make the daily editorial decisions, and they ran it, and it was a huge hit. And a year later, Harry Donenfeld is a millionaire. People want to talk about Jerry got this and that. Harry Donenfeld's a millionaire, and he had nothing to do with it. He, in fact, made fun of it. And you probably know this. The only reason Harry had published many things, he had major mob connections. He'd been a rum runner during Prohibition. He'd been indicted twice for pornography and barely escaped prison. His main interest in acquiring this comic book company was, it would allow him to print something that wouldn't get him thrown into prison. He had no idea this was going to turn out to be the cash cow that would carry him for the rest of his life. But that's what happens.
What draws me, to this story and stories like this is a warning, because I'm in media and I have colleagues and collaborators who have maybe not come up with Superman, but have, for example, I know a team near us that did an indie film, sold it to HBO. HBO had a huge premiere, and they ended up with nothing.
Yeah.
Because once the distributors got in and then the HBO and all this stuff, they literally just lost money didn't make a penny from the whole thing. And so it's an interesting challenge for creatives to how to balance, what could be versus like you have nothing in front of you and you just want the chance for people to see it and then not having the back end to support. So it's a tough choice.
That's exactly the point and why I wanted to write this book. It really is a cautionary tale. I mean, sure, things have changed a little bit since then, but the sharks are still out there. They're still they're still there. They may look a little bit different, but they still exist. You probably know I host a writers conference every year. It's called WriterCon. It's coming up because it's always Labor Day weekend. And one of the things I tell people at the opening ceremony is make friends, meet people, because there'll come a time when you'll want somebody's opinion. Like, is this a legit publisher or is this fabulous email offer I got just AI slop? You have got to protect yourself so what happened to Jerry Siegel doesn't happen to you.
Actually, so let's take a break and talk about WriterCon for a second. So where is this happening? It's Labor Day
It's in
weekend.
Oklahoma City. Like I
I've
said,
heard
it's
of
every
it.
Labor Day weekend. This is our 19th year, and it gets bigger and bigger. I'm a little biased, but I think it's one of the top conferences in the country because we assemble a lot of people, give useful information, and see people actually acquire agents and actually get publishing deals as a result of it. And that's what I want. I, I've been around my first book was published in 91. So I've been at this for a while and I know who the legit agents and legit publishers are. And so there's nobody there who shouldn't be there or is there to take advantage of people. And I think we put on a terrific conference. And I think people need to make friends with other writers. Another thing I say every year, I know, you're writers, you're probably all
Yeah.
introverts. You'd rather be at the library than here amongst a bunch of people. But you know what? Make friends, talk to people
You're telling
because
people who usually sit
you'll
there and
need
write
it.
in the dark by themselves to go make friends. That's
Yeah,
kind of tough.
exactly. It's nice to have a cat, but sometimes you're also going to need some people who might be able to tell. I see people come in every year who have blown 15,000 on some vanity press, and they've gotten a book, but it's never going to be for
See,
sale anywhere,
yeah,
or it's just going
yeah.
to sit in their garage for forever. Or you probably read about the Anthropic lawsuit, or there's a fair settlement, but a lot of writers are going to get cut out of it because their publisher didn't copyright their work or didn't get a
Right.
Library of Congress number.
Yeah.
People, do it yourself. Don't sign anything unless you've talked to a lawyer or a very experienced agent first. And don't trust any offer that sounds too good to be true. It it could be. It probably is.
It
Every
probably is.
morning I wade
I mean,
through
for
all this.
everybody.
Yeah, don't you start every morning with all this AI stuff that looks really convincing because the AI has probably scraped your book or an interview, and so they're knowledgeable, but it's just fake. They're either trying to get your money or your info so they can hack into something or another. And then again, 2 days ago, I got an email asking if the rights to one of my book series were available. And I thought, oh, this is scam, but I'll send it to my agent and see what she says. And she came back, no, this is the real deal. So that's why you need to have somebody you
Never
can
trust a
talk
gift horse
to.
unless it's a real. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's funny. So we'll get back to your book, but so we
Mhm.
brought up the convention I mentioned before recording. I'm going to go. Actually, I'll be at Worldcon, I think the week before in LA, which is a sci-fi writers
Oh, cool.
convention.
Yeah, I know. Where is
Yeah,
it this year?
it's in LA. It's in Anaheim. Sorry, it's in Anaheim. So my first time out there. But before that, I'm going to be at I'm going to be at the Star Trek convention, the 60th
Yeah,
anniversary,
I'm so
uh,
jealous.
selling the book. You said you were at the 50th.
I was
Um,
at the 50th in New York, which I thought at the time was the big one. But when I got there, everybody was saying, oh, you need to go to Vegas. That's like the official deal. And as it turned out, this is bizarre, but my wife and I were actually in Vegas at the time that 50th Star Trek convention took place for a totally different reason. And one night we went to see Whoopi Goldberg because she was appearing in town. And when she came out, she said, yeah, I'm in town for this Star Trek convention. It's the first one I've ever done. And then she brings Rod Roddenberry up from the audience. And I thought,
funny.
why are we here? We should have gone to the conference, but I didn't know.
You haven't lived until you've played blackjack at the Rio with a Klingon dealing you cards and giving you
Is
chips.
that right? I would
That's
love
what-
that.
But okay, so back to
Yeah,
your book.
back to
Okay,
Superman.
back to Superman and the Superman Wars. So what was it? Like, why were you drawn to this? Why did you want to tell this story?
Well, I first got in. I mean, I'm a lifelong comic book geek, and I knew a little about the Siegel and Schuster story, but not enough. And I was doing a book called Justice for All. It's a legal thriller, and it dealt with creator rights battles. And I started looking into ones in the past and came across this. And, you read a little and then you dig in deeper and deeper. And it looked like it was never going to end. There was so much more to it than I realized. You go online and you'll get either, the Jerry supporters, boy, those guys were ripped off, or the Jerry bashers, who will claim he made millions of dollars, which is not true. I mean, could he have used his money more wisely? Sure. But he was a kid, for Pete's sake. And, which of us did save money prudently when we were in our early 20s? Not me. I can say that for sure. So, I understand it all. When push comes to shove, though, as you probably know, Jerry's drafted in 43. Joe is 4F because of his poor eyesight. But Jerry spends a couple years overseas serving his country and probably trying to get away because at that point, the correspondence between he and Jack is just toxic. And that's in the book, too. Jack is abusive, rude, threatening, constantly threatens to fire him and Joe if they don't get what he wants. Fire him from his own feature, you know, uh, a- and and they've supposedly got a 10-year employment agreement at this point, but I don't know what the point of that is if the boss can fire you anytime he gets grumpy. Anyway, Jerry gets back from the war and finds out not only have they brought the whole Superman operation in-house, even brought Joe in-house, kind of seducing him with medical help and forming a dubious partnership called Schuster and Donenfeld, which never did anything. But worse, Jerry had given Jack a script for a new character, sort of new, Superboy, which would be the adventures of Superman when he's younger, of course.
Yeah, of
But
course.
Jerry's idea was to create something new, so this time he wouldn't mess it up, He would own the character, which of course is why Jack wasn't interested. So he refused it. He rejected it several times. And then when Jerry's overseas and can't do anything about it, he runs it anyway. He gets somebody to draw it and runs the feature, and it's a hit. So then he starts a whole new Superman series that's earning tons of money, and Jerry's getting nothing. And at that point, he's just reached his limit. And as you know, in 1947, becomes the first American writer to sue his publisher, to stand up to power, so to speak. Does it go well? No.
That's sort
He
of the
gets a
theme of the
little
book.
money on Superboy. What?
I said, is that the theme of the book? Does it go
Yeah,
well? No.
well, up to a point. It does
Yeah.
reach a happier ending, but man, there's about
Gotta
70
weave.
years of litigation before you get
Yeah.
there. No, he gets a little for Superboy. He does not get the rights to Superman back because he signed that piece of paper. But worse, they fire him and Joe both. And even worse than that, they remove their names from the credits. Prior to that, every Superman story said created by Siegel and Schuster. After that, they've been erased. Even when they reprint old stories that had appeared before, they color over Siegel and Schuster's name. I mean, why? How did
Yeah.
that help the company? That's just spite, isn't
Yeah.
it? And we could argue about the legalities and that letter agreement all night long. I wish I'd been Jerry's lawyer, but that's not really saying that I'm so great. I just think he was massively outlawyered in this deal.
Yeah.
But legalities aside, taking an artist's name off their work, that's just wrong. That is
Yeah. It's unnecessarily
morally
cruel. Yeah.
wrong. Yeah.
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 So one thing I wanted to ask you is, so the style of this book, it's a narrative nonfiction. So you're doing it in Siegel's head. Why
Yeah.
do that versus
From his
more?
viewpoint.
Yeah. Why that versus, more of the straight facts in history?
Well, I thought it would be more engaging and perhaps more to the point. I wanted people to not just understand the facts, not just what happened, but why it happened. And I don't think you can get that unless you understand who Jerry was and what he was trying to do. Why did he sign that? Where did his money go? Why did he write those letters in 1951 that, let's face it, are pretty out there? Uh, but telling the story, from his viewpoint, I think makes everything much more clear. Those letters in
Yeah.
51 were extreme, but look at it from his viewpoint. He's just been fired from his own creation. He's struggling to make ends meet because he was basically cleaned out by a divorce. He's married Joanne, the original model for Lois Lane, and he's the original model for Clark Kent. So how cool is that? In the early 50s, his daughter Laura is born, and I get it. I got daughters too. You want to do everything you can for them, but he can't. George Reeves is on television portraying his character, and yet is his name anywhere there? No,
Yeah.
they're making more money off his character, and he's not getting a penny. And he's just at his wit's end. I think if that happened today, we would probably say he had a nervous breakdown
Mm.
because and he says I found that autobiographical fragment. He wrote about 100 pages of an autobiography that he never published, and he says in there that at times he felt suicidal. I think if it hadn't been for Joanne's support, this story might have had an even sadder ending. But she, in effect, becomes the agent Jerry and Joe never had and make it possible for him to write, which is what he wanted to do. And she took care of the business stuff and handled it, frankly, much better than he ever did. I think there's this myth out there that, after Superman, Jerry just whines for 3 decades. That is not remotely true. He writes constantly. He hustled like nobody ever hustled before. He created Funny Man, which has a brief place in the sun. He edited for Ziff Davis. He created Lars of Mars with Murphy Anderson. He wrote, did you know, more than 170 stories for the Italian Disney company. He
Wow.
wrote for the Duck families, like Huey, Dewey, and Louie. He did all those Junior Woodchuck stories. He was writing constantly, but unfortunately at that time, you just couldn't make much money writing comic books. There was very much an attitude that, if we can stiff the creators of Superman, the first and greatest superhero, we can treat anybody like trash. And that's really
Right.
pretty much what happened, at least up until 1976 when Jeanette Kahn takes over the company.
So we've got, narratively speaking, we've got our hero that we're following through
Yep.
here, right? Your villain. Is it fair to say that Harry Donenfeld is the closest thing to a villain in this story, but with a big
Harry,
asterisk? Because I want to
yeah,
get to that
Harry and
epilogue.
Jack.
Yeah.
I would actually say Jack was more of the villain because he was in charge of the day to day. And he clearly has a mean streak. I mean, you can see it in these letters. You can see it in the decision to fire them and erase their names from the credits. That's just mean spiritedness. Harry seemed to have this ability to compartmentalize business from life. If I won't spoil everything that's in the book, but he actually does use his Superman money to good purpose.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that he didn't totally stiff Siegel and Schuster. The way he acted as a business person was very different from how he acted as a private citizen.
But did it affect, so he was involved with rescuing a lot of
Yeah.
refugees. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing.
Amazing amount of Jewish refugees. Does that color anything that in for you as the writer uncovering the story? Does knowing that make it harder to portray him a certain way? Or does it force you to be more balanced for him versus others?
Yeah,
Knowing
that's
that?
an interesting question. If I didn't ask if you had a chance to read the book, I don't want to put people on the spot, but I put that at the end for a reason because that's how we all found out about it long after we knew about what he did as a publisher. And I wanted it to be the eye opener it was for readers that it was for me and everybody else. But I mean, I don't really believe in good guys and bad guys outside of comic books. These guys were businessmen with mob ties, and they used mob tactics, and they didn't think there was anything wrong with that as long as you stayed out of prison. That was how you run your business and become profitable. There's a point in the book where Jerry realizes it too. He mentions it in the autobiography. These people aren't evil, they're business people, they're
Yeah.
not artists. The major was an artist at home. He was not a great businessman, but he was a pretty good writer. But these guys don't have any artistic inklings at all. They are businessmen, and That's the clash. It's not good versus evil. It's art versus commerce.
Yeah. Well, okay, so as a comic fan, when
Mhm.
you go and see like James Gunn's Superman, which made like $600 million,
Yeah.
are you watching the film? Are you seeing the superhero, or are you just thinking about that history?
No, I'm just enjoying the superhero because I'm so glad, like with last year's movie, to see. Really, I think, I mean, we all loved Christopher Reeve, including me. He looked like a
Yeah.
Kurt Swan drawing had walked off the page onto the screen. But I don't think there's ever been a better portrayal of my Superman, the Silver Age guy who basically is just a nice guy because he was raised by a farm couple in Kansas, just north of Oklahoma. I get it. And they raised him to be a good boy and help people. And so he is. I thought that was a beautiful portrayal. That said, during that movie, and for that matter, Supergirl a couple of weeks ago, when Jerry and Joe's name come on the screen, I start applauding. And then my kids look at me
Everyone's
like,
looking at
oh,
you like,
Dad, don't embarrass us.
I love it.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
there is
It's
that great story that Laura told about the when she went to the screening of the first Christopher Reeve movie. Some people will remember in '75 there was a big PR campaign on behalf of Siegel and Schuster, and eventually at the end of the year, the company relents and grudgingly agrees to give them a $20,000 pension, roughly the same amount they were paying secretaries at the time. Elliot S. Magan pointed that out in an article for Village Voice, and boy, did he get in trouble. Anyway, so they got their names restored and got enough money that they wouldn't starve to death. And there were subsequent cost of living increases and such, but I thought it was pretty thin gruel. Um, and people listening to this, if you remember that from '75 and think you already know this story, you so don't, because there's 50 more years of fighting and squabbling before, the litigation isn't over till 2016, and it does lead to a much happier result,
yeah.
not only for Jerry's family, but for other creators who came after him, both in the comics world and elsewhere. This became the most important creator rights battle of modern times. And Jerry's fight, even though it didn't help him enough, it's helped a lot of people since.
Well, you said, to the listeners who might remember 1975,
Mhm.
we're lucky if our listeners remember 2015. Um,
Okay. Let me explain. Um, Here's what happened. And I didn't get to the premiere story anyway, so I'll just lead up to it all.
oh
In
yeah.
'75, Jerry has finally taken a civil service job because he just can't support his family writing. So he's working for the state of California and typing other people's stuff and sorting the mail and wearing a name badge that says Jerry, and you can imagine how much he liked that. And then he reads in the newspaper that Mario Puzo, the author of The Godfather, has been given $600,000 to write a Superman script. And he's like, I'm right here, guys. I created the character. I know a lot more about him than this mafia guy. Why aren't you hiring me? And so he generates this 9-page, he called it a press release. It's kind of long it's more like an
9
extended
pages.
rant, although it turns out to be all factually accurate. And he makes 1,000 copies, sends it out to every media outlet he can find. Crickets. Nothing back until finally, who picks up the stories? Not big newspapers, fans. Because by that time, we have an active comic book fan community, adults who take this seriously and want to know more about the writers and artists behind these stories. And they pick up the story and put it in fanzines, some of which had very small circulations, but one thing leads to another, and the story gets out, and eventually big East Coast agencies pick it up, and he ends up on Jerry and Joe end up on television, and Neil Adams, great comic book artist of the era, takes up the case. Jerry Robinson, who had a similar experience ghosting for Bob Kane in the early days of Batman, he takes up the cause. And he was a good negotiator too. And by the end of the year, he's gotten their credits restored and this small pension to them. So when the first Christopher Reeve movie finally comes out, they're invited to the premiere. And as Laura Siegel, his daughter, described it, she's sitting in the darkened LA theater waiting for the thing. She's sitting between both parents, Lois Lane on this side, Clark Kent on the other side. Oh, and did I say this? Their daughter grows up to be a reporter. How perfect is that? Award-winning reporter. Couldn't have written that better. Anyway, 4 minutes and 16 seconds into the movie, you remember how the credits swoosh out toward the audience,
Yeah.
and it swooshes out Superman, created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Schuster, and the audience goes crazy because they know the story, so there's crying and applauding and hooting and hollering. And Laura felt both parents squeeze her hands, and she looked over at her dad. I'm sorry, now I'm going to get choked up. Tears streaming down his face. It meant so much to him. And just to be clear, he got no money from that movie. He was not asked to be any part of it, but just seeing his name up there, to be finally recognized as the co-creator of Superman, meant so much to him. I think that was more important to him than any amount of money could have been.
Yeah, I mean, being in his shoes and experiencing that, you're almost tearing up there. Like, why does this resonate with you? Like, why are you so attached to this experience?
Well, I'm a writer too. I mean, sometimes people ask, why'd you write about Jerry, not Joe? I'm not trying to cast any shade on Joe, but it was Jerry's idea. He came up with the original idea, and he's the writer. And I get writers, having
You
done
can
it for many,
put
many
yourself in his
decades now.
shoes, and yeah.
Well,
So were
I
you
can
living
in
through him away from uncovering all this?
I
No, I
can
mean, like,
relate to it.
yeah,
Not that I ever created Superman or anything like it, but I get, for instance, Jerry was a precocious writer. He was getting stuff published when he was a 1-digit age. My mom says I was telling people I wanted to be a writer when I was 7. I know that seems incredible, but it's my mom, so we got to go with it, man. and and I got my first rejection letter when I was 11. So and lots more afterwards. So I totally get what he went through. The only difference is, when I finally got my first book published, I was 31 and a lawyer, so nobody was going to take advantage of me. But Jerry was in a much different situation, and I totally get it. I get where he was. I get how easy he was for these sharks to take advantage of him. And I just think this needs to end. If we
yeah.
want to continue to have art, we need to do a better job of taking care of our artists.
Okay, before I let you go, I got to ask you two
Sure.
questions. Because one, Superman enters the public domain in 2033. Is that right?
That's
Is
correct.
so what's that going to look like? What's your thoughts on?
Well, DC Comics will argue that all that goes into the public domain in April of 33 will be the original Jerry and Joe version of Superman, who looks a little different and didn't fly, and I don't think had X-ray vision yet. But will people use it? I don't know. Mickey Mouse has already gone into public domain, at least the Steamboat Willie version.
Yeah,
And yet, other than one really bad horror movie,
the
I
Winnie the
haven't
Pooh. Oh,
seen.
for Mickey. Oh, I know there's
Well,
Winnie
Winnie
the
the
Pooh.
Pooh was first. I watched about 20 minutes of that one, couldn't stand it any longer. But a thumbnail, Christopher Robin has left the wood and all the animals have gone feral in his absence. So they attack anybody who shows up. I don't know what they did in the Mickey Mouse one, but you don't see a lot of unauthorized Mickey Mouses going around. So I don't know if it'll be different for Superman or not. We'll see. But I did one of the things nobody will talk about are the details of the settlement, although I figured it out anyway from other sources. But I've wondered, there is an arrangement now with the Siegel family and the Schuster family.
Mhm.
What happens to that when the character goes into the public domain? I think it won't matter, but I don't know that for a fact.
Well, can't let you go without asking you about Jeopardy real quick. You're a Jeopardy
Okay.
champion.
I thought you were going to ask if I was going to write a Superman novel in 33.
That's a better question. That's right. You're deep into the lore. Yeah.
Yeah,
Or
I
turn this
thought
into
of
a
it.
or turn it into a movie. The story, how come there hasn't been a movie like of the
Don't
story?
you think this would be a terrific movie? I would
Absolutely.
love to see that.
Because like they're
They
coming
did
out
a
with the making of Rocky, so why not? I think that's coming out
Yes,
soon.
and they've
So,
done a movie about the guy who came up with Wonder Woman, although sadly the movie was mostly about his eccentric personal life rather than
see.
about Wonder Woman. But of course, they probably couldn't show images without DC Comics
Getting to 'em,
permission. But I think the story about Jerry and Joe is so poignant and at times heartbreaking. But like I said, it does end well and it benefits so many other creators. Jack Kirby, Jack Kirby sent a letter to DC denouncing what Jerry was doing in 1951. Jerry thought the whole creative community would rise up and support. Well, wrong. Nobody did because they were all
Right.
afraid of losing their jobs. So Jack and Joe Simon sent this suck up letter to DC saying, we don't approve of Jerry. Guess who's suing 4 or 5 decades later? It's the Kirby estate making the same exact claims now that the
Yeah.
Siegel family has proven that they're viable. They even hire the same lawyer.
Wow.
Everybody in comics has benefited from Jerry's fight. And so that's why I think it's so important. Did you ever
Well-
get to ask that last question? I don't remember
About Jeopardy.
now.
I didn't know what my question was. Just wanted
Jeopardy,
to
yes.
point out that
What
you
did
were
you
a
want to
Jeopardy
know?
champion. I don't know. What's it like?
Oh, it was a blast. I mean, I've watched this show literally since I was 4. I used to watch it with my mom. And even when I didn't know any of the answers, I just thought it was cool. I'd watch those people and think, I want to be smart like them, And I should have gone on earlier, but I didn't go. When they started doing the testing, you could do it from home. I took it and got on. I was in my mid-50s by then, and probably not the quickest on the buzzer, but who cares? I got to play the game. I stood on the stage. And I
cool.
did win a game. So, I can't complain about anything. That was such fun, hanging out in the green room and watching other people play the game, and then you get to do it yourself.
Yeah.
I thought I was a disaster, at that first show when it cuts to commercial before the interviews, which, by the way, were the hardest part of the
I
show.
was going to ask. I've heard the interviews are awkward and everyone hates them and it's uncomfortable. And
Yeah, I think they're better now with Ken Jennings hosting. I'm not, gonna talk trash about Alex at all because I thought he was wonderful, but
Yeah.
I don't think the interviews were his best thing. I think
Yeah.
Ken is much more relaxed and much better at kind of having a humorous conversation with people. But yeah, they're just, it was pretty painful. I thought if I could survive that, playing the game would be easy.
Well,
But I did so badly in that first segment during the first commercial break. I'm just like looking up to the sky and saying, just let me play Final Jeopardy, I don't want to be one of those
Just
sad
be the
sacks who
negative.
gets escorted off because they don't have any money to wager. And of course, it did turn out well. I
Yeah.
got it's a dream. Double Jeopardy went much better when the questions were harder, and Final Jeopardy had to do with books and musicals, and I love both, so it turned out well.
Good for you. Well, I am very jealous. I was going to say you're a Jeopardy person. I was going to say I'm more of a Wheel of Fortune, but to be honest, I'd be more of a press your luck kind of guy, and I can mash a button and not answer questions. That's probably more my speed. The Superman Wars is out, so what are you working on right now?
Well,
Can you share
next
anything?
year's book, as I think I already intimated, is going to be the Batman Wars, which actually came from my publisher because I guess they were pleased with the advance orders on this one. And they said, Batman actually sells more copies. And I said, you know what? There's a creator rights issue there that, if anything, is less well known and in some respects even more heartbreaking than what happened to Siegel and Schuster. Of course, I'm talking about Bill Finger and also Jerry Robinson, both of whom were buried under the shadow of Bob Kane, who I think did come up with the name Batman And that's about it. But we'll save that for next year's book.
Next year, come back next year. We'll come out to you. We'll find you. I'll dig up Trevor.
Cool.
What's the best way for people to keep an eye on what you're doing or check out the book? Where should we send them?
I think you can get the book about anywhere. I can't predict whether a local bookstore will have it, but if they don't, complain
Ask.
bitterly and tell them to order it. And I know it's online. It's available online, of course, at Amazon and other places, because like most authors, I look constantly has my
What's the
ranking gone
ranking?
up half a point or whatever? It's like crap
That's not
for
just me.
writers. You
Yeah.
keep going back and
It's like we had a
reloading the
promotion.
page.
We're like crazy in Australia. Let's keep that right.
Yes, exactly. I'm big in Japan, but the book seems to be doing all right, so I'm pleased.
That's great.
I just keep trying to say I love comic books and comic book fans, and I would think your audience would love it too. But even if you don't, my mom, I keep mentioning, she's 97. She read the book and she could care less about comics books, but she liked the history.
Everyone likes a good backstabbing and moral quandary.
Yeah. To her, it was a history and biography, and she liked seeing that. And she understood why this was significant to artists and writers. And if you're interested in the arts, I think it's a book that'll be interesting to you.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining
us. Thanks for
even
having
though
me.
Trevor
It's been a
is
blast.
nowhere to be found. I appreciate your time.
Tell Trevor I'm totally ticked off that he's not here, and I expect him to show up next year, okay?
Yeah, if you knew him, you wouldn't think that way, but... Thanks to our guest and to all of you for watching and listening. Please subscribe on all the platforms, and you can email us at nowin-scenario-podcast@gmail.com. Trevor will return, I promise you. But in the meantime, I think we're thriving just fine without his supervision and snark. See you next time.